I told you about it when I came home. Anyway, that's what I did last week.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I know when there's communion service, it takes a little while for everybody to get down here, but get settled. We've got a lot of good stuff to cover today, so. I don't know if how many of you know this. In the front of the hymnal, there's a bunch of personal prayers, and one of them is for the synod, and for my synod, and I thought that would be a good one to use today to begin our study. Lord Jesus, your Spirit calls and gathers the whole church on earth and empowers it for service. Guide and preserve the work we do with other congregations in our synod. Keep us loyal to your word and give us courage to confess your truth boldly. Bestow on our leaders pure hearts, clear vision, and patient faith. Raise up new generations of faithful witnesses who will join us to proclaim the gospel to every creature through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All righty. It is another great day for church history today. This week in, okay, good, we got you trained. All right. This week in Wells history. So I mentioned this fact, a couple of these things last week actually. October 6, 1870, the Synod signs a contract with George Brumder to publish our first hymnal, German language hymnal. Interesting thing about that hymn, I think maybe I mentioned last week he promised 1 penny a copy. I think it was actually 10 cents a copy that the Synod received. Or at least maybe that got upped over time, I forget. But he kept publishing that. He published it until into the 1890s, and then the Northwestern Publishing House took it up. The last edition of that, I think maybe I mentioned that, was like in the 1960s. They published one more edition of it. So that was that on October 6th. October 6, 1986, Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary dedicated the Auditorium Gymnasium building. That was the last new building on our campus until maybe, God willing, later this year or next year, we're in the middle, or we're going to be starting a capital campaign at the seminary to build a new education wing and a new fellowship space. The fellowship space will actually be off the back off of one part of this building, the one that was built in 1986. That was built with Reaching Out funds. Some of you might be around long enough to remember the Reaching Out fund drive that occurred in the early 80s, and some of the money went to build that gymnasium auditorium. That has been a true blessing on our seminary campus to be able to have the Christmas concert there, the call day service, the graduation, even the event we had yesterday. We had Friends of the Seminary Day. I know Sue Smith was there. I don't know if there was anybody else from St. John's there, but nice to have a place like that on the campus. And then, happy birthday on October 8th. Happy birthday, NPH. Northwestern Publishing House was formally established on October 8th, 1891. So that's how long NPH has been around. All right, today we're gonna talk mission work, especially mission work basically we'll go look 1890s to 1950s. Our synod in first quarter century or so, and even moving into the early 1880s, our synod leaders in particular wanted to do outreach, not just gathering German immigrants and so on, but they wanted to reach out with the gospel to others that were from different cultures. Many of the early Wisconsin Synod pastors trained at mission houses had entered those mission houses with the dream of going to places like India or Africa. Instead, they were sent to Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan to gather immigrants. Now, that wasn't a bad thing either, but I think they kind of had those dreams of going elsewhere and bringing the gospel to others. And so in our early synod's history, often congregations would have mission festivals, and the money raised would go to help the synodical conference mission work that was carried out. But we kind of wanted to do our own. But what challenges, maybe just to get us thinking a little bit, what challenges do you think might have been in the way, at least in the early decades, of doing that kind of mission work, that kind of either overseas or to some other culture? Isaac.
Other cultures don't speak German.
The language thing. They don't speak German. That's one challenge for sure. The culture and the language. John?
They didn't seem to have enough pastors even to just cover their own congregations.
Yeah, lack of pastors, not enough workers. In fact, that kind of was what our synod devoted a lot of its attention to early on, was developing a system so we could train more pastors. So that kind of takes up a lot of the time and energy. What else do you think? Maybe at least one other reason I can think of. It's kind of maybe an ongoing one. Sure. Money. Yes, money is always a challenge. And when you got a bunch of immigrants who are just trying to get their feet on the ground in America, do they have enough finances to go elsewhere? And so there were a number of things that were maybe barriers. But as the synod gets growing, and so you can see the early growth of the Wisconsin Synod. By the time we get to the 1880, we're 85 pastors, 147 congregations. That growth has been continuing. You kind of get to a point where, okay, maybe now we have kind of a critical mass where we can pool our resources and reach out for somewhere else. And so the Wisconsin Synod started looking for some opportunities. There was one option was let's maybe find a mission society that we could give our money to here in America that could then, that's doing mission work, but they couldn't find one that basically shared our doctrinal stance. One thing they did do in the late 1890s, they asked if there were any Northwestern students who might be willing to serve in such a capacity, to serve as a foreign missionary. And three guys stepped forward. Johannes Plucker, George Adashek, and the guy on the far right, Paul Meyerhoff. It's not that they received any special training. They did not. Basically, the synod covered their educational costs. That was getting set aside for mission work. The synod then started looking for a place. They sent out to Arizona in the early 1890s, 1891 or so, a couple of pastors to go look for a place. And they started talking to some people. They actually talked to a Presbyterian missionary who was reaching out to the Pima Indians in Arizona. And he said, try the Apache. The Apache had only a few years earlier been settled on the reservations. Geronimo had been defeated, and no one else was doing mission work on the Apache reservation. So at the 1892 meeting of the initial meeting of the Federation, I mentioned that last week, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin synods form a federation where we say we're still independent synods, but we're going to work together in different things. And one was worker training, and we talked about how that new system was set out. One was publishing. Northwestern Publishing House now becomes the publishing house for this federation. And the other was this effort now to do mission work among the Apache. And so the following winter or spring, I'd say, when Adashek and Plucker graduated from the seminary, that October then they were ordained and commissioned, and headed out to the Apache reservations. We didn't give them much support, I'll just say, or training. They didn't have any language training. They didn't really even know English all that well. Plucker knew English better than Adashek. Adashek just never really picked up English. They didn't know where they were going to live. They basically lived the first year in a glorified tent. And, oh, go ahead, please.
Why did the Synod choose the Apache in Arizona when there's so many various tribes a lot closer? I mean, even in Wisconsin and so many other states, like what is the obsession, what was the decision making there?
The decision, she asked, what was the decision making? Why go out to Arizona and not one of the Native American tribes that were settled in the Wisconsin area? I would say the biggest reason, we were looking for a place where no one else was doing mission work. We didn't want to be in competition with maybe the Missouri Synod Lutherans or the Presbyterians or Methodists or whoever else was working. We wanted a fresh mission opportunity. And so that would be the reason, I think, the biggest reason why we went out there to the Apache reservation. Weather out there, climate. It's hot in the summer and it gets kind of cold. It's high desert in the winter. And so that first year, it was a struggle. You'd wake up in the morning and your water dish was, your water was all kind of, there's a layer of ice on it, and in the summer it just was blazing hot. They endeavored to build parsonage homes for the two men. That was kind of a big thing in the beginning. Adashek didn't even survive a year. About a year in, he left, took a call back to Wisconsin, and then in 1896 he was replaced by Meyerhoff. Plucker, he went out there single, came back, got married, went back out there in 1894 with his bride. She was from Oshkosh. Her dad had been a pastor in Oshkosh. And they'll have at least one of their children is born out there. He'll be there for about 5 years. Then the climate just gets to be really tough on his wife especially. The work was slow. They first were doing work in schools, the government schools. They got permission to teach English, and then have an opportunity to teach Bible stuff too, to teach the children about Jesus. Eventually, they were able to build and start their own school, and so they would get anywhere from 10 to 20 Apache children would come to the school initially. It took them about 5 years before the first baptisms. And interestingly, in this picture, you see the one white child in the middle center. That's the Plucker's child. So these were the first baptisms, the first children involved too. Like I said, Plucker left in 1898, and Meyerhoff had come. He's the guy on the left there on his horse there in 1896. Carl Ginther replaced Plucker then, and so you still had a team of a couple of guys. Slow going in the beginning. Again, the language issue was a challenge. The lack of how do we even go about this work? How do we start? They figured start in the schools, start with children is kind of the way things went. Things start to take off or improve when this man, I missed my guy. Gustav Harders arrives in 1906. I thought I had his picture up there, I guess not. Gustav Harders arrives in 1906. He came out to Arizona. He had actually been, he was a pastor I think it was at Jerusalem here in Milwaukee. Plus he was helping out, do some teaching at the new Lutheran high school that had just gotten founded in Milwaukee. But he had some lung and throat issues. And often what they would do is suggest that you go to a warmer, drier climate if you were having those difficulties. So he went out to Arizona to find some relief and stayed. And eventually the Synod called him to be the superintendent. And he helped get things more organized and publicized in the Synod. He wrote 3 novels in German, but that were set on the Apache reservation. And the Northwestern Publishing House published them, and people read them, and it just got people's interest in what was going on in the Apache reservation. A couple of important families, mission families, spend their entire careers on the reservation. It's that kind of dedication that really helps move the work forward. In 1911, Edgar Ginther and his new wife, Minnie, arrives fresh out of the seminary, newlyweds. I think their honeymoon was the train ride out west. Arrive on the Apache reservation. Interesting connection here with St. John's. Minnie's sister is actually my great-grandmother. She was the wife of Carl Otto, who was the pastor who came to St. John's in 1927. So there's a little Apache family connection there. But Edgar and Minnie will come, and they will spend their entire ministry, entire career, Edgar will, there. He will get to know one of the chiefs. This is Chief Elchasay. He will be an important figure and kind of in the story here. Edgar Ginther was known as the Tall Missionary. People would talk about him, the Tall Missionary is coming. He was involved with building Open Bible Church in White River. Maybe, I don't know, was this the first Builders for Christ effort? I don't know. But when that church was completed, and on the day of dedication, Chief Elchasay walked in with 100 of his tribespeople and pointed to the Tall Missionary and said, "You listen to what he says from the good book." And then all of them were baptized. And when Chief Elchasay died, he died with the key to the church clutched in his hand and was buried with that. He said, "This was the key that opened heaven to me," was what I heard from this church and in this book. This is Elchasay with Ginther's son, Arthur, whose full name was Arthur Elchasay Ginther. And Art Ginther will also spend his entire ministry on the reservation. So from 1911 till into the 1990s, there was a missionary Ginther serving on the Apache reservations. There's him in his later days there with some of the Apache Christians. So just a remarkable family. The interesting thing, interesting connection with me then a little bit. So in 1934, Pastor Otto from here, his oldest son, Rudolph, graduated from the seminary. Now, in the 1930s, most of the seminary graduates, when they graduated, did not receive calls. There just weren't any available. You weren't starting really any missions too much. Guys weren't retiring. They couldn't afford to. And so he didn't have a call coming out of the seminary. But Aunt Minnie and Uncle Edgar were out on the Apache reservation. And they said, Rudy, come on out. You can live with us. It won't cost the synod a dime. We'll put you to work. And so he became the assistant pastor at White River. One of the things that the Ginther, I'll get to the rest of the story in a second. One of the things the Ginthers started in the early 20s was the nursery on the Apache reservation. I just love this picture of the babies in the boxes there, because a lot of the mothers, particularly, I think if I remember right, if they were twins, they would abandon them because they thought that was somehow the gods were angry, and so they would abandon. And so the Ginthers did a lot of work to get this nursery started. This picture, actually, the man on the left is Minnie Ginther's brother and sister-in-law. So they came out to do work and to get this kind of orphanage started. We'll get to the rest of the family the next family in a second. So that nursery was a big thing. And a lot of Wisconsin Synod women in particular who were looking for something to do would get some training and then go out to the Apache reservation. Well, up in Kewaunee, Wisconsin, there was a woman named Edna Stibbs who had dreams of taking care of babies like that. And she got some deaconess nursing training and went out to the reservation. Well, pretty soon, young, dashing Pastor Rudy Otto was making trips over to the East Fork Nursery to take out Edna. And the rest is history, as they say. My grandparents served on the reservation, I think, till about 1939 or so, and again, kind of the climate was a little tough, and the altitude and such was tough on my grandma, I guess. And so then he took a call to Wilmot, Wisconsin. But the family connections that you see, and God bringing people together in different ways. A young pastor whose father was in Wauwatosa, and a young woman who's grew up on a farm in Kewanee, and they meet in Arizona. So go figure. Another important family on the reservation was the Uplegger family. So in 1917, Alfred Uplegger, who's on the far right, and his classmate Henry Rosen, who's on the far left, both got assigned to the Apache reservation. They would eventually become brothers-in-law when Henry married one of Alfred's sisters. 2 years later, Alfred's father, Francis, got a call and accepted a call out to the reservation. He was in his 50s or early 50s. He had been teaching at the high school here in Milwaukee. He goes out there, and this family will spend their entire lives, the rest of their lives out there. And Francis, turns out, was a linguistic genius. He worked to develop the written Apache language. The Apaches did not have a written language prior to him developing that. And of course, you can understand why missionaries might want to develop a written language for people. So you can put the catechism, the hymnal, parts of the Bible, and so on into their language and then teach them to read, and we can keep that mission work going. And so his work is actually considered kind of still a standard for classic Apache language, and it's in the Huntington Library out in California or something, and some places in Arizona as well. So a Wells missionary kind of having that sort of an impact on things. His wife died in like the 1920s, but he continued serving there until his death in 1963. I think he was like 97 or something like that when he died. The chair he's sitting in is actually now on display at our Wells Museum at the Salem Landmark Church here in Milwaukee. So if you ever want to check out the chair, you can go down there and see it. Schools were a big thing, a big part of the work there. There were at one time several different grade schools, plus eventually East Fork Lutheran High School was on the reservation. Often, a lot of these several decades, first decades of the 20th century, this was the foreign mission work of our synod, and our members would donate clothes and for the children and toys at Christmas time and things like that. You got the school, and some teachers would end up getting called out there to serve on the reservations. And the cluster of congregations, some of the names might be familiar: East Fork, White River, Peridot, San Carlos, places where we still have churches yet today. We have 9 churches yet on the reservation. And so this was really the focus for many years of our synod's ministry work. And there's another one of the babies. Those always get the oohs and ahs, yeah. There's school children all in their nice outfits there, school uniforms and so on. And then this was recently the installation of an Apache pastor. He took a call to a different congregation on the reservation, and there was a nice service there with him involved. So that was the Apache. Question, sure. She asked, do the schools receive government funding? That I'm not sure of. Today, I'm going to guess they do, because Arizona has a voucher program, and I'm guessing they're part of that. I don't know if they did back in those days. I think it was a lot of synod support. Greg?
I assume they're pretty much English speaking on the reservation now?
Yes, English speaking today. Yeah, he's asking about what's spoken today. Yeah, I think it's primarily English. I think there's some work with the older people yet in Apache. So I think our missionaries who go there still do learn Apache, at least some.
What was the reaction of the tribe when someone would convert to Christianity?
She's asking what was the reaction on the tribe of people who converted to Christianity. I don't know. I don't think there was quite the negativity that you might see in some other cultures. I mean, when you have a chief who comes with 100 of his guys, that kind of maybe says that there isn't that stigma. I think in general, particularly when our missionaries started there was definitely a skepticism toward toward the white man, particularly because it was very recent memory that the Apache had been settled there. So there was that barrier and challenge that our early missionaries had to face as well. Way in the back. Oh, I'm sorry, up here.
Have we developed Apache ministers?
I'm sorry, what?
Have we developed Apache ministers?
He's asking if we've developed Apache ministers. There have been a few, like the one pictured there is Gary Lupe. We had also trained a man who had graduated from the Pastoral Studies Institute program at our seminary about 10 years ago. Sadly, the Lord called him home to heaven rather suddenly about a year ago. Kirk Massey was his name. And so actually Lupe took the call to where Massey had been serving. We've tried, I think there's maybe one or two in the pipeline somewhere. We're trying to develop a program that they can stay on their reservation and still do their studies, yeah.
There's another question.
Okay. Back here, yep.
It wasn't really a question. I just happened to know that, well, she happened to know. My mom actually lived on the reservation.
Oh, okay.
She knew the Upleggers.
Oh,
She ended up getting sent back up here because she said when she and her siblings actually learned how to speak Apache, and they would speak Apache at the dinner table, and they would try and, so basically their parents couldn't understand what he was saying. They were concerned that she was turning Apache.
okay.
They sent her back up to the Michigan Seminary to re-acclimatize herself.
That was your sister or the Upleg?
Mother.
What?
My mother.
Oh, your mother, okay.
Yeah.
She said she knew the Upleggers and lived with them and was getting,
Well, no, she didn't live with them.
Or
She
knew
was on
them,
the
though.
reservation. Her dad was a teacher
okay.
on the reservation. So she and her 4 siblings, as well as her grandmother, lived down there for probably like 10 years.
Okay. That's.
She has pictures.
I think there's a lot of connections that different people have in our synod with the Apache reservation for sure. There've been a lot of workers, called workers, who've gone down there for sure. Yeah.
Where have the Apache been moved from, and do you think they have trouble with the climate as well?
Oh, she asked where they moved from. Are you talking back in the 1880s or?
When they were just moved and resettled into Arizona.
Yeah, I don't know all the history of that. I know that the Apache, I know that they were a challenge. I mean, they were kind of, bands of them were kind of running around New Mexico, Arizona, a little bit of Texas maybe, and then they jumped the border down to Mexico to try to escape. The U.S. Army was chasing them. There was a lot of that going on back in the 1860s, 70s, 80s. I personally don't know all the history behind that. I just know that Geronimo was defeated in like 1885 or 7 or something like that, and then that resulted in kind of I don't want to say pacification, but that's kind of what it is, where things got settled and then they're on the reservations and the government's providing rations and things like that to the people.
Geronimo's buried in Oklahoma, so even Oklahoma.
Yeah, at the end, after he got defeated, then he got taken to prison. He spent the last years. Geronimo spent the last years of his life in prison in Oklahoma. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next. If you want to read more, if you ever want to read more, there is a book that at NPH recently published called Inishued. It was written by Eric Hartzell, who grew up on the reservation and also served there for a while as a missionary. He has just a lot of neat stories that are part of it. And Inishued was the Apache name for pastor or missionary. Literally, I think it means think the literal translation, guy in the black robe or something like that. It's a literal translation. But all right, let's move on. Let's talk about some home mission work real quickly. Expanding outside the Midwest. You know, there's all sorts of mission work that's going on in the Midwest, obviously gathering people together, but as we get to the late 1800s, we start to see things pushing out. So for example, the Minnesota Synod started looking west. And the guy on the left there is Christian Betcher. He was sort of the first traveling missionary who was working into the Dakotas. The picture on the right there is of a church in Goose Camp, North Dakota. And that congregation actually for a bit had some Native American members as part of it that were baptized and confirmed as part of that congregation. This is a map that's in the Synod archives that just shows some of the places in North and South Dakota where different congregations and mission and preaching stations and so on were getting started. And so you have places like, you know, Watertown and just different places near that. Glenham and Mobridge. Timber Lake, Green Bay Packer tight end, Kraft, is from Timber Lake. And incidentally, we used to have it, we don't have a church there anymore, but actually my grandpa Schütze served the church there, Timber Lake, and several other churches that were around it in the early 40s. So I was getting a kick out of that. The pride of Timber Lake, South Dakota. But you can just kind of see where our synod's starting to do some work there. And by 1920, here's a church in Roscoe, South Dakota at its Cornerstone Lane in Roscoe, South Dakota. This is a church in, I think it's Grover, maybe South Dakota. That's where the first district convention was held. 1920, after the Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin synods formally merged to form now the Wisconsin Synod as we know it today, and started forming districts. So you have the southeastern Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska. The next two new districts, one of them will be 1920, the Dakota-Montana district. So now we have a new district there. Surprisingly, one place where we got some mission work going early on was out in the Pacific Northwest in Washington. The guy on the left there is Friedrich Wolf. He was sent out to Washington by one of the Eastern Synods to start a church in Tacoma. But then he kind of, I think, it was a combination of, I don't think he agreed completely with their doctrinal stance. Plus, I think they sort of abandoned him out there. And so he went looking for help and looking for a synod to attach himself to, and he found the Wisconsin Synod, of all places. And so by the 1890s, we have this church out in Tacoma, Washington. Well, what naturally happens, you start looking for other places to start churches. And for example, Grace in Yakima, Washington gets started in the early 19-teens. And by 1918, there's enough pastors and congregations out there to form a district. So these are the guys who were at the first district convention of the Pacific Northwest District in 1918. Right front and center there, so the third from the right in the center is the synod president of the time, Gustav Bergaman. Bergaman, I think I read correctly, he traveled, for the course of the first several years of the new federated, or the new merged synod, he traveled something like 20,000 miles on trains back and forth across America, out to Arizona, out to the Pacific Northwest, to Nebraska, to the Dakotas, to be at all these district conventions and kind of have a presence out in those districts to help them understand you're part of this bigger thing called the Wisconsin Synod. So he was tireless in making that work. The first district president is the guy right next to Bergaman, Friedrich Soll, S-O-L-L. And so there's a picture of Bergaman. So we add two new districts almost right away. So we're doing mission work out there. As we move into the 30s, remember we had mission work or we had the Nebraska Synod got started. I think I mentioned that. It was a bunch of people in Ixonia who were tired of all the the doctrinal stuff, and so they move out and they start Norfolk, Nebraska, and St. Paul's there, and then a bunch of other churches get started. So we have a Nebraska district. Well, they started looking farther west, and pretty soon you got, Arizona first. It made sense, we got the Apache work going, that we might do other mission work in Arizona. And so pretty soon we have churches starting in the Phoenix area. This is the school kids at Grace in Glendale, Arizona. Still have a church, pretty large church and school there today. Tucson, there'll be people in Tucson pretty early on as well. And by 1950, then Colorado's another one. Then we go to Colorado in the 1930s. So this is Zion and Fort Morgan, Colorado. Their first confirmation class and the church there. And so they'll be in some smaller towns in Colorado will start mission work, even in the 1930s when it was a little bit more difficult. 1950 saw us start mission work in California. Up until 1950, we had sort of back in the 19-teens, when I think it was Harders was going on the train out to Arizona, he happened to be sharing a car with a Missouri Synod mission official. And they kind of came up with a handshake agreement. The Wisconsin Synod will take care of Arizona. The Missouri Synod, you guys can have California. And so the Missouri Synod sort of kept out of Arizona. They did not have a church in Arizona until like 1930. It was the last state they had his church in. And we stayed out of California until 1950. By 1950, there's so many people in California, we don't have to be so territorial anymore. And so 1950, the Synod votes to approves sending missionaries there, or pastors there. And so Armin Keibel and Friedrich Noll will be the first two pastors to get sent to the Los Angeles area. And so the Synod produced a little kind of handout. They used to have something called the annual. It's now today the Wells Yearbook. But back then they would often include in that annual information about some Synod mission or Synod ministry. And so that year they had a whole thing. It was about probably a 16-page thing on our ministry or our missions in Los Angeles. And so we started two churches, one in what was called Mar Vista, which is today, we still have a church, the original church is still there. They renamed it Hope Lutheran. One of my cousins is actually the pastor there. And the Tarzana church, I think, closed recently. But this was some of the first workers there, some VBS teachers and the group there. There was some pretty rapid growth in the 1950s. Added a few other pastors and churches, including Our Saviors in Pomona. And so by the end of the 50s, you've probably got about 5-6 pastors in California, and we've started work up in Northern California. All this led to another new district. 1954, the Arizona-California district gets founded. The initial meeting was here at Tucson, Grace Lutheran Church in Tucson, and then the first convention was held that summer on the Apache Reservation. And this is the picture of the guys who got elected to the Presidium and other positions in the Arizona-California district in 1954. So now we've added district number 9. So we got 9 districts then in 1954. It's interesting how they tried to communicate sometimes things back to the Midwest about what was going on in these outlying areas. I love this description that was published in the Northwestern Lutheran in 1959 or late 50s. This was by Paul Hine, who actually served as my father served as a vicar for him out in Southern California back in like 1967, 68. And he wrote this: if one of the pastors in Watertown, Wisconsin would conduct his services on Sunday morning, then drive to Milwaukee and take a plane to St. Paul, Minnesota, where someone would meet him and take him to New Ulm for an evening service, you would say that would be fantastic. Yet the same and greater distances were traveled in order to provide these people with Sunday services. And he's talking about initially the guys in Southern California were traveling to Northern California to carry out services before we had pastors up there. So the guy who's in Los Angeles, he had to drive to the airport, which wasn't always real close in the LA area, a lot of traffic and such. take a plane up to, say, San Francisco, then drive to Santa Clara to do a worship service that evening. That's a lot of, I mean, after he had done Sunday morning service. And so that's kind of, but I love how he's trying to put it in terms that the folks back in most of the Midwest Welsers would understand and could relate to. Yeah?
Aren't plane tickets, like, expensive?
He's asking whether plane tickets were expensive. I think in the 50s on those shorter ones, they were a little bit less, little bit more affordable. Those short hops, because this is 50s, you were probably going to be on a prop plane for the quick trip. Picture, oh, back in the corner. You said $25 for a flight? Okay. I don't know what that would be in today's dollars, 25. But I imagine the Synod was putting some money into this to try to get things going. And by the late 50s, then we had 5-6 pastors there. Also in the 50s, we went to Florida. Now the interesting thing about going to Florida, starting church in Florida, the Synod in the early 50s had a policy. The mission board had a policy. You can't hopscotch states. If we're going to start a church, it's got to be in the state adjacent to where we already have a church. Now, California was okay because we had a church, we had stuff in Arizona. Colorado's okay because we got Nebraska. Florida, there was a lot of states between Ohio and Florida. Now, what the Synod didn't say, it was okay to do was do an exploratory trip. Or at least it was a little fuzzy. So this guy, the guy on the right is a guy named Louis Ott. He was a layman from Cullowhee, Michigan, and he was a member of the Michigan District Mission Board. He also happened to have a winter home down in St. Petersburg, Florida. And he's like, I mean, come on, man. There's a lot of Wells people down here. We need to start doing work down here. So he basically invites the pastors of the mission board. They go down there in February of 1954. Just wait, I got a great quote for you. But 1954, February, they go down there and they spend like 10 days traveling around the state, trying to find, doing exploratory work. Where are some good options here? This is the map that was drawn up that shows just all the different places around Florida that they visited. And this is part of their report. The members of the board resent the inference, not all of which were in jest, that the trip was an expense-paid vacation to Florida. St. Paul explored mission fields, too, on expense money provided by the church in Philippi. And no one thinks today he was on vacation. One does not relax and rest and kick back on the beach while traveling 1,400 miles in 8 days and checking city after city for mission possibilities. The survey was made in all earnestness. So, in other words, get off our back. Now, the Michigan district was a little bit of a maverick district back then because they were so excited about the possibilities. Louis Ott already had kind of at least put in, I don't know if you want to say earnest money or something of his own on property. And the district went ahead and called a pastor, Pastor William Stye, who, by the way, happened to be Louis Ott's pastor in Cullowhee, Michigan. So he accepts the call down there. His wife goes, obviously, it's going to be the organist and all this, and they start a church, Faith in St. Petersburg. The Synod, there's some interesting letters that go back and forth between the Michigan District Mission Board and the Synod Mission Board, there's some accusations about doing things out of order, not orderly way, and so on. But then you read the minutes, and it's like they finally decide, we should probably have a face-to-face meeting on this and hash this all out. And then the minutes kind of say, the meeting was held, discussions were had, and we decided, here was the decision. I can imagine that the discussions maybe were, I don't know. But they all hugged it out in the end, and the Synod adopted the mission, and we got things going in Florida. And eventually we're going to have 3 pastors there after not too long. And other churches, this is Peace in Bradenton. Some of our churches have changed over time where they are, and Like, for example, the church that Pastor Schwartz was serving before coming here had been Peace in Holiday, Michigan, or Florida. Now it's Peace in Trinity, Florida, I think it is. But so we got going in Florida. Not quite a district yet. We'll have to save that for next time. But one last, two more outreach efforts. We also talked about doing Hispanic outreach in the 40s. And interestingly, the guy on the right there, Venus Winter, he had been a pastor in Flint, Michigan. His wife had died probably a few years earlier in the early 40s. So he was a widower with 3 children at home. As a hobby, he started teaching himself Spanish. Well, when the Synod decided they wanted to start a mission, Hispanic mission, Edgar Haneke knew Venus Winter and said, here's the perfect guy to call. And so he accepted the call. And in the winter of 47, 48, he and his 12-year-old daughter, who is the mother of former district president in the Arizona, California district, John Buchholz, they drove out to California in a 1937, I forget what kind of car it was, didn't have heat in it. The windshield wipers were not working the whole story is, angels were watching over them. I'm just going to say that. They basically limped into Tucson on fumes and the transmission of their car just not working very well. Trying to get over mountains and everything was just a real challenge. But they got out there and he started San Pablo, Iglesia de San Pablo Luterana Church, Synod of Wisconsin, right? Started to work there, even had a school there for a while. The mission, that church closed, I think, in the 80s when neighborhoods changed and everything, but it kind of was the first Hispanic work. So we were thinking about doing that too in the 1940s. The story I got to tell, oh boy, this is going to be hard. Well, we'll see if we can get it done in 8 minutes or so. We had the struggle of the Great Depression. Our poor pastor or President John W. Brenner gets elected in 1933. Only time when, in our synod's history, when we voted out of office another president. The synod was facing a sizable debt. It got up to $750,000, which in today's money would be probably about 14 or 15 million. But also remember, our synod was much smaller. So that's a lot for a synod to be able to deal with. And during the Great Depression, Brenner and the synod treasurer often had to make the difficult decision when not enough money came in from synod offerings. Do we pay the professors or do we pay the missionaries? More often than not, he decided we pay the missionaries because at least the professors and their families can eat in the school cafeteria. So just a real struggle. But in 1935 at the Synod Convention, Edgar Haneke, young pastor from Plymouth, Michigan, and he's on the Apache Mission Board, he gets up and says, we gotta devote our efforts to paying this down so we can keep the gospel moving forward. Brenner and other leaders were like, let's be careful here. If we start doing too much of that, then we're not going to be able to pay the missionaries and the professors and so on. Haneke was kind of cutting edge. He put together these bulletins that would get offered to the synod to get sent out to members, talking about the synod's work, talking about Christian stewardship, giving updates on how we're doing, like with graphs and charts, and sometimes even drawings, different things like that show how the progress that's being made. So he's using visuals and pictures. Even these drawings like this is kind of cool. We got to get that gospel train. We got to fill in the gaps so we can keep the train going to the cities and places where the gospel's needed. And so, through the efforts of Haneke and others, and the synod people, the members of the synod, by 1945, not only was that debt paid off, but we had like $300,000 to the good. And so the 1945 convention made the decision, we're going to form a committee to explore overseas mission work. Now that committee had some internal conflicts. Do we wait for somebody to say, come and help us? Or do we go out and look and explore ourselves? There was a debate. Finally in 47 they said we can go out and look ourselves. Okay, who's going to do that and where? Finally, Haneke said, I'll go, and his friend Arthur Wacker, a neighboring pastor in Michigan, said, I'll go. And so in the spring of 1949, they embarked on a fascinating trip. They're dubbed the Wells 49ers. 1949. They go on, it's like a, I forget, I think I have the miles. First they had to go over on a ship, get dumped off in Cape Town, Africa, 4,000 miles around Central Africa, Southern and Central Africa. And they finally find a place in what was then called Northern Rhodesia. Today it's Zambia, near Lusaka, to start our first overseas mission. If you would like to, so here's the incentive to join the Wells Historical Institute. If you join during this anniversary year, we will give you a copy of the Wells 49ers, the story of this journey told by Edgar Haneke himself. If you ever want it, he put together a film strip that was shown in congregations around the synod called Africa Still Calls. If you do a YouTube search, Africa Still Calls, you can find that. It's on YouTube now. It's just very interesting to hear his account. And it's probably about an hour-long video that just his footage and everything. It's just really cool if you like that sort of thing. So the 1951 Synod Convention then said, okay, we're going to start overseas mission. We're going to send a guy to Japan to serve military personnel, but also to do exploratory work for Japanese work. And we're going to send 2 guys to Africa. Fred Tiefel, that would be the uncle of Professor Emeritus Tiefel from the seminary, he accepts the call to Japan almost right away. Heads over there, he's serving military people, he's gathering people in Bible studies, doing language study. The only problem was Tiefel, this is the time when we're having these discussions with the Missouri Synod, and Tiefel felt that we were not, as a Wisconsin Synod, acting fast enough to break with Missouri. And he got to the point where in 1957, President Naumann, Edgar Haneke went over to Japan to talk to him face to face and say, come on, we've got to work together here. He hung up on President Naumann. They went to his door and he wouldn't answer the door. And we lost that first effort. We lost the property even because it was in his name and all this. But Haneke and Naumann were there to welcome the seminary graduate and his wife who had just gotten assigned. And so we start over, oh, there's Naumann and Haneke. We start over with Richard Petter. Oh, there we go. Richard Petter and Richard, I have the names there. Richard Seeger. They get the work restarted there, and Petter in particular spends the rest of his ministry there. He stays until like the early 1990s. So that's the work in Japan. Our guys in Africa, it was a pastor in, I think it was from Hoskins, Nebraska, Albrecht Haben, one of his laymen, Paul Ziegler, and then a seminary graduate, Otto Drevlo, are the first missionaries to go to Africa in 1953. There is the first worship service in Africa in Matero near Lusaka, later in 53. Things are a little rocky in the first years. It really starts to take off in the late 50s, early 60s, when a new crop of missionaries gets there. This is a picture of the missionaries there. Do we have the laser thing? That's no. The one here is Schweppe. He had been over in Nigeria, William Schweppe. Ernst Wentland is there, kind of in the back. The way on the far right is Theodore Tate Sauer. He serves there for many years. I got to know him a little bit in his retirement. He was retired in Manitowoc. Wonderful, just a wonderful Christian gentleman and hard worker, servant. Robert Saywall, Raymond Cox. There was a Mueller who was there, just a number of new missionaries that went. And so the work expanded into Malawi pretty quickly in the 1960s. We started a Bible Institute, and there's Mrs. Wentland actually teaching some of the classes at the Bible Institute, as well as a seminary. Got started in the 1960s. And then in the early 60s, we started the Central Africa Medical Mission. Mrs. Haneke was a nurse, and they knew that the importance of doing this medical work if we're going to be able to build bridges and help people physically as well as spiritually. And so Barbara Welch was the first nurse from the Wells Nurse who went over to Africa to work in the dispensary there, the medical mission, and even took it on the road, the mobile clinic. And that's still supported today by the Central Africa Medical Mission, many women's groups and so on across our synod still support the work there. And so in the 1950s, this is kind of what it looked like. This was a map that was produced in one of those annuals that showed just, the only thing that's missing there is Florida should be colored in, but this was, I think this was 1953 when this was published, so we hadn't been quite to Florida yet. When you talk about God's surprising grace to our sin, just that God opened many doors. And by His grace, He moved our people, our members to support the work, and a lot of pastors and teachers and others to take calls there and even spend their whole lives serving on some of those mission fields. So I wish I had more time for questions, but are there any real quickly? I guess I have maybe a minute or two. Next time we'll look at what I'll call the golden age of WELS mission or WELS growth during and kind of coming out of the break with Missouri. I won't talk a lot about the break with Missouri Synod because I know Dr. Brown has did a Bible class not that long ago on that. I'll touch on that, but I'll talk a little bit about the timing of it, why I think it was God's surprising grace in some ways in that too, and then I'll think where things went in our synod as you get into the 60s, 70s, and 1980s. Actually enjoyed phenomenal growth in many ways. So thank you all for being here again, and blessings on your week.